The road runs west out of the tree line near Torsk, and for 2 years a Russian supply truck could drive most of it. On a gray morning in early 2026, it no longer can. A single Kamaz noses onto the open stretch, and 40 seconds later it is burning in the ditch, its cargo scattered across cratered asphalt. The driver does not get out. This is not one bad morning for the Russian army on the Lyman axis. It is the new arithmetic of the whole sector. And one Ukrainian officer put a hard number on it. We'll get to that number. The number describes how far a Russian soldier on this part of the front now has to walk. Not drive, walk. And the reason he walks is the story of what small quadcopters have done to one of the oldest problems in warfare, the problem of getting food, water, ammunition, and fuel from the rear to the men who need it. This is the Lyman axis in the winter of 2026, and it has become one of the clearest examples anywhere on the front of what happens when drones take a road away from an army. Start with the map, because the map explains everything else. Lyman sits in the north of Donetsk region, close to the border with Luhansk, on the western edge of a belt of pine forest and river valley that has been fought over since 2022. To the east is Kreminna, held by Russia. Between them runs the Serebryansky Forest, the Siversky Donets River, and a scatter of shattered villages, Torsk, Yampol, Zarichin, names that mean nothing to most of the world and everything to the men who move through them. This is not open steppe. It is close country, tree lines and ridges and low ground, and for a long time that terrain favored the attacker who could mass close and push. Holding this line for Ukraine is the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade, among other units, one of the most experienced formations in the army, hardened at Bakhmut and rebuilt again and again. And it is a communications officer from that brigade, a deputy with the call sign Disney, whose description of the sector gives this video its spine. What he described in plain operational language was not a single spectacular strike. It was a condition. A steady, grinding condition that Russia has not been able to break. The condition is this. On the Lyman axis, Ukrainian FPV drones now cover the approach route so thoroughly that Russian vehicles can no longer bring supplies close to the contact line. Trucks are caught and destroyed well before they reach the forward positions. So the resupply effort gets pushed deeper and deeper into the Russian rear, staged further back each time a vehicle burns, until the last stretch to the front has to be done by men on foot. According to that officer, the distance those men now cover on foot is more than 20 kilometers. 20 kilometers. Hold that in your head while we build the picture around it, because it sounds like an exaggeration until you understand the machine that produces it. A separate voice from the Ukrainian side, a spokesman for the country's armed forces, described this same sector in early 2026 as one large gray zone, a stretch of front where active drone penetration turns any logistical operation, for either side, into a serious and dangerous complication. That phrase, gray zone, is worth pausing on. In older wars there was a front line and there was a rear, and the rear was where you were safe. The gray zone is the death of that distinction. It is a band kilometers deep where nothing on wheels moves without being hunted, and where the old assumption that the rear is safe simply no longer holds. For the Russian command on this axis, that assumption did not die quietly. It died a truck at a time. To understand why, you have to understand the weapon. The drones doing this are not the long-range, fixed-wing strike aircraft that fly 100 kilometers to hit an airfield or a refinery. These are FPV quadcopters, first-person view racing frames strapped with a warhead and a camera, flown by an operator wearing goggles who sees exactly what the drone sees until the instant of impact. Reach on the contact zone versions runs from roughly 15 to 60 kilometers depending on relay setup, battery, and antenna. Cost runs from a few $100s to a couple of thousand. They are cheap, they are everywhere, and on the Lyman axis they are flown in numbers that have turned a set of roads into a set of traps. Here is the thing that makes them so effective against logistics. A supply truck is not a tank. It has no armor worth the name. A Kamaz 5350 or a Kamaz 6520 is a soft-skinned vehicle carrying diesel, ammunition, water, and food, and every one of those cargoes is either flammable, explosive, or simply irreplaceable. You do not need a precision anti-tank missile to end a fuel truck. You need one FPV quadcopter and an operator with steady hands. The math of that exchange is brutal. Ukrainian forces say a strike drone worth a few $100s can eliminate a truck and a cargo worth tens of thousands, and can do it repeatedly night after night along the same 3 or 4 approach roads. That is the first act of this story. Russian trucks hunted on the approach before they ever reached the men they were meant to supply. Now walk it back in time, because this did not happen overnight. Through 2024 and into 2025, FPV coverage on most of the front reached out 3, 4, 5 kilometers from the line of contact. That was already a problem for the last leg of resupply, but it left a workable rear. A truck could drive to within a few kilometers of the front, unload at a staging point in a tree line or a cellar, and the final stretch could be run by a lighter vehicle or a quick dash on foot. The system strained, but it held. What changed on the Lyman axis and on several other sectors through late 2025 and into 2026 was depth. Better relays. Fiber optic drones immune to jamming, trailing a hair-thin cable that no electronic warfare system can cut. Ground repeater stations pushed forward. Larger operator teams flying in shifts around the clock. Each improvement added kilometers to the reach, and each added kilometer pushed the safe staging point further back. 5 kilometers became 8, 8 became 12, and every time a staging point was found and struck, the Russian logisticians did the only thing they could. They moved it back again. That is the mechanism behind the 20-kilometer figure. It is not that one heroic drone flies 20 kilometers to hunt one soldier. It is that the entire safe distance for wheeled transport has been shoved so far to the rear that the walking gap left behind, the gap between where a truck can survive and where the trench actually is, has grown to more than 20 kilometers of ground a man has to cross on his own 2 feet. Before we follow a single strike from the operator's side, understand what this does to the Russian commander's day, because his problem is arithmetic, not courage. A rifle company in a defensive position consumes water, ammunition, and food at a steady rate. In a normal war, you meet that consumption with a truck. Take the truck away and you meet it with backs and shoulders. A man can carry a fraction of what a truck carries. He moves at a fraction of the speed, and every trip exposes him for hours instead of minutes. The commander who once resupplied a position in a single evening run now needs a relay of men walking through a hunted forest for the better part of a day, and he loses some of them on the way. 3 months earlier, the same commander could have told you the roads were dangerous but usable. By the winter of 2026, usable was gone. And this is the point where his assumptions turned into losses, because he kept trying the roads anyway. He had to. An army does not stop eating because the delivery got hard. Picture the reconnaissance side first, the Ukrainian side, because that is where the trap is built. Long before any strike, the approach routes into this sector are watched. Reconnaissance drones fly high and quiet, mapping which tracks the Russians use when they use them, where they slow down, where they bunch up at a bad culvert or a narrow bridge. Ukrainian forces say the pattern of Russian resupply on the Lyman axis was studied until the operators knew the choke points better than the drivers did. You do not need to guess where a truck will be if you already know it can only take 3 roads, and all 3 roads are watched. That intelligence gets turned into a schedule. Not a written schedule, but a rhythm, an understanding among the operator teams of who covers which road, at what hours, with which drones. The forest does not sleep, shifts rotate. Goggles come off one operator and go onto the next, and the road stays covered. This is the least cinematic part of the whole story and the most important. The reason a Russian truck cannot reach the front is not one brilliant ambush. It is patience, organized and industrialized, applied to the same stretch of asphalt for weeks. At roughly the 5-kilometer belt, the last belt a wheeled vehicle can attempt, the Russians tried every trick logistics units try when the sky is hostile. They ran at night. The drones flew at night too, with thermal cameras that turn a warm engine block into a beacon against cold ground. They ran in fog and bad weather. The drones adapted. They ran fast and alone instead of slow and in convoy, betting that a single vehicle moving quickly might slip through. Some did. Many did not, and the ones that did not left their wrecks on the shoulder as markers, a growing line of burned-out Kamaz frames that told every following driver exactly how far he was likely to get. That line of wrecks is the truest map of the gray zone. You could plot the reach of Ukrainian FPV coverage by walking the road and counting the hulks. Each one marks a morning when a driver made a bet and lost it. And still the trucks came, because the men in the trenches beyond them were out of water and low on rounds, and somebody in the Russian rear had a quota to meet and no better idea than to send the next vehicle. That is the fifth-minute reality of the Lyman axis. The roads did not close all at once with a single dramatic event. They closed the way a wound closes, slowly, painfully, one loss at a time, until the artery that fed the Russian front on this sector was pinched down to a thread of men carrying sacks. But the closing of the road was only the setup. What it forced the Russian army to do next is where the real cost lands, and we'll get there. First, one truck on one morning seen the way the operator sees it. Start the clock. It is a cold, still morning in the belt of forest west of Kreminna, and the light is flat and gray, the kind of light that flattens shadows and hides movement, which is exactly why the Russians like to run in it. In a dugout several kilometers back on the Ukrainian side, an operator with a withheld call sign sits with his goggles pushed up on his forehead, watching a small screen that shows the feed from a reconnaissance drone loitering high over the approach road. He has been watching this road for 3 days. He knows where it dips, where it narrows, where a driver has to slow. At the edge of the frame, movement. A single vehicle, a Kamaz truck, noses out from behind a shattered farm building at the far end of the open stretch. It is not moving fast yet. The driver is doing what drivers on this road have learned to do, hugging the tree line, using the wrecks of earlier trucks as cover, timing his run for the moment the sky seems empty. The sky is never empty. It only seems that way. The operator does not scramble. There is no panic in a dugout that has done this 100 times. He pulls the goggles down and the world narrows to the view from a second drone, the strike drone, an FPV quadcopter already in the air, already moving toward the road at low altitude, hugging the terrain the way the truck hugs the tree line. The reconnaissance feed and the strike feed work together, one high and wide, one low and lethal. The high drone tells him where the truck is going. The low drone is how he gets there first. The Kamaz reaches the open stretch and the driver commits because there is no half-committing on a road like this. He accelerates. On the high feed, the truck stretches out along the asphalt, a long dark shape trailing a faint haze of exhaust in the cold air. On the low feed, the road rushes up as the FPV drops toward it, the drone closing the distance at highway speed, the crosshair centered on a moving target that does not yet know it is being hunted. Inside the cab, if the driver saw anything at all, he saw it for a second or two, a small object growing fast in his mirror or his windshield, the last warning the road ever gives. There is no outrunning a quadcopter in a truck. The FPV closes the final 100 meters in a handful of seconds, and the operator does the one thing the whole system exists to let him do. He holds the line and flies it in. Impact. The feed goes to static in the instant the warhead detonates against the cab. On the high drone's view, the truck lurches, slews sideways and stops, and then the fire starts, first a bloom of black smoke and then the deeper orange of diesel catching. The driver does not get out. The crew, if there was more than one man, does not get out. The cargo, whatever it was, water, rounds, rations, diesel in cans, becomes part of the fire or is thrown across the road to be finished by the next drone. The whole engagement, from the truck committing to the open stretch to the column of smoke, takes less than a minute. That minute is the entire war on the Lyman axis compressed into its smallest form. A vehicle worth tens of thousands of dollars, a load worth more, and a man who chose to cross a border that was not his to cross. All of it ended by a drone worth a few $100s flown by someone who never left his dugout. And then the operator pushes his goggles up, makes a note and waits for the next truck. Because on a road like this, there is always a next truck. Now widen the lens, because the destruction of one Kamaz is not the point. The point is what the accumulation of 100 such minutes forces the Russian army to do. When the road is closed, the supplies still have to reach the front. And so the Russians did the only thing left. They got out of the vehicles and walked. This is the second act of the story, the forced pivot, and it is where the 20-kilometer figure comes from. Ukrainian forces describe a Russian logistics system that has been driven off the roads entirely on the last approach to the front. The trucks now stop far back, at staging points pushed ever deeper into the rear as each forward point is found and struck. From there, the last leg is carried by men on foot, not for the last 100 meters the way infantry have always carried the final load into a trench under fire, for kilometers, for more than 20 of them, according to the officer with the call sign Disney. Think about what 20 kilometers of foot resupply does to a defense. A soldier carrying a heavy load over broken ground through forest, avoiding open stretches, moving at night, resting when he has to, covers that distance in many hours, not minutes. He arrives exhausted. He carries a fraction of what a truck carried. And then he has to do it again and again because a position in combat consumes supplies faster than tired men can carry them in on their backs. The math does not close. You cannot feed a defensive line by hand across 20 kilometers of hunted forest. You can only slow the rate at which it starves. And the men doing the carrying are exposed the entire way. A truck crosses the gray zone in minutes. A man on foot is in it for hours, and the same drones that hunt the trucks hunt the walkers. Ukrainian forces say the drone coverage that closed the roads does not stop at the roads. It reaches the men who replaced the trucks. The pivot to foot resupply did not escape the kill zone. It just changed what the kill zone catches. Here is the strategic consequence stated plainly. Because this is where a burn truck becomes something larger than a burn truck. An army that cannot resupply by vehicle cannot mass for a serious attack. Offensive operations consume enormous quantities of ammunition and fuel in short, intense bursts. And there is no way to stockpile that at the front when every truck that tries to bring it forward is destroyed on the approach. So the drone war on the roads does not just make life miserable for Russian logisticians. It quietly strangles Russian offensive capacity on this axis. You cannot launch what you cannot supply. That is the deeper meaning of the gray zone the Ukrainian spokesman described. It is not merely dangerous ground. It is a filter, and the thing it filters out is the enemy's ability to concentrate force. Every kilometer that the safe staging point gets pushed back is a kilometer of tempo taken away from the Russian command. A defense that can barely feed itself cannot suddenly surge into an attack. It can only hold thinly and hope the pressure eases. On the Lyman axis, through the winter of 2026, the pressure did not ease. Remember the line of burned-out Kamaz hulks marking the reach of the kill zone. That line is a boundary Russia keeps trying to push west and cannot. Every wreck added to it is a small defeat, and the wrecks accumulate. The Ukrainian defenders did not just hold a set of trenches near Lyman. They moved the line of which kilometer is safe another several kilometers further from the front, and they moved it in the direction that matters, deeper into the ground the invader is trying to use. The corridor that used to feed the Russian assault is not safe anymore. The defenders made it that way, one truck and one drone at a time. There is a cost to the Ukrainian side too, and it belongs in an honest account. The same gray zone that strangles Russian logistics complicates Ukrainian movement in the sector as well, which is exactly what the armed forces spokesman meant when he said any logistical operation for either side becomes a serious complication. Drones do not check whose road it is. Close country like the Serebrynsky forest is hard on everyone who has to move through it. The difference is who is attacking and who is defending. The side that needs to mass and push forward is hurt far more by a closed road than the side that only needs to hold and hunt. Defense feeds on exactly the conditions that starve offense. The gray zone favors the defender, and near Lyman the defender is Ukraine, fighting on its own internationally recognized ground. It is worth being precise about what is confirmed here and what is not, because this channel does not trade in invented tallies. What Ukrainian sources describe is a pattern and a condition. Drone coverage that has driven Russian vehicles off the approach roads and forced resupply onto the backs of men, crossing more than 20 kilometers on foot. The specific strike we walked through minute by minute stands in for the hundreds of such engagements that produce that condition, not for a single verified event with a body count attached. The important truth is not any one truck. It is the arithmetic that one truck represents repeated until an army's supply system bends. And that arithmetic is spreading. The Lyman axis is not unique. It is an early, clear example of a shift happening in sector after sector along the front, where the maturing of FPV coverage is quietly rewriting one of the oldest rules of war, the rule that said the rear was safe. When the rear stops being safe, everything an army does gets slower, costlier, and thinner. The trucks stop. The men walk. The attacks do not come because the supplies to fuel them never arrive. So return, finally, to the number we started with. The one the officer with the call sign Disney put on the sector. More than 20 kilometers on foot. That is not a statistic about distance. It is a measurement of how far Ukrainian drones have pushed the Russian army back from its own front, without taking a meter of trench, simply by making the roads impossible. A soldier who has to walk 20 kilometers with a sack on his back to reach the line is a soldier who is losing slowly to a weapon he will never see coming and cannot afford to answer. The road west out of the tree line near Torsk used to be a road. Now it is a graveyard of trucks, and a boundary the invader cannot cross with anything on wheels. The men who move on it move on foot through a forest that watches them the whole way, carrying by hand what an empire once promised to deliver by machine. Somewhere back in the Russian rear, a logistics officer is looking at a map and deciding how much further to move the staging point, and the answer every week is further. On the Lyman axis, the front did not advance. The distance a man has to walk did, and that distance is measured in the losses of an army that was told this ground would be easy.